Alright, so welcome back to another comparison. This time we're going to be comparing the Sennheiser HD820s, the closed back alternative, to its older brothers, the Sennheiser HD800, and the middle brother, the Sennheiser HD800S. So just a quick history lesson about the Sennheiser family, the HD800 line. The Sennheiser HD800 came out and everybody was just crazy over it. They said, this is an amazing headphone and it's got the soundstage and the imaging and the, oh, beautiful, beautiful bass, and, it's got all this, huge cups, and because, we're into huge cups, and they were amazing. But they did have some detrimental flaws in the treble. They had a couple of spikes in there that just generally speaking ruined the experience, on top of what was already a brighter treble response. So Sennheiser listened to these people and released the Sennheiser HD800S, which basically just bumps up the bass a little bit and reduces the treble a little bit. The goal of which was to primarily reduce the treble peaks. So then some time passed and Sennheiser said, hey, let's go ahead and release a closed back alternative of the HD8X0 line. And so here we are, the Sennheiser HD820s in the flesh. Now first of all, I'd like to give a quick shout out to a longtime friend of mine and longtime friend of the channel, Silent. Okay, so do me a quick favor and go ahead and check out Silent over on his Instagram. He goes by Silent SS. You can go ahead and check out what he does on the daily. He's actually a pretty cool guy, does a lot of cool stuff. And, and now that we're here, screw it, I'm gonna plug myself too. So I literally just created this account like 2 minutes ago, just so that I can go ahead and show Silent's profile, and he already went and followed me back. So yeah, I'll be uploading stuff here, upcoming videos, maybe some special behind the scenes content, what have you, but definitely go ahead and follow this if you feel like it. And once again, thank you very much, Silent. Without your help, this three-way comparison would not have been possible, so thank you very much. So let's go ahead and start off with the contents. One key thing to point out here is that Sennheiser updated the design and contents of their HD800 line as of a few years ago. As a result, the HD800S will either feature the previous contents, like the HD800, or the new contents like the HD820. So for starters, the HD800 and HD800S featured in this video come with the old outer box design and the cardboard inner box, which after a while began shipping with a foam-lined compartment as opposed to the velvet-lined compartment of yonder years. The HD820 featured the new outer box design and a wooden black-stained inner box with a foam-lined compartment. Although I do think this new box looks preem, I must say that for display purposes, man, I have been playing far too much Cyberpunk. I must say that for display purposes, it can be a bit concerning since you've got the entire weight of the lid weighing down against the outer edges of the cups. Not that it's going to destroy your headphones in any way, it's not that heavy, but still, you probably don't want all this weight on your brand new multi-$1,000 headphone, so do keep that in mind. Now all three of these share the same 3mm vacuum cleaner 4th inch cable. The HD800 never shipped with a balance cable out of the box, but the HD800S and the HD820 do. The HD800S used to ship with a 4-pin XLR cable, but now ship with a 4.4mm Pentagon cable instead. The HD820 also ship with this cable. They also come with a microfiber cleaning cloth and the manual. So now let's jump into the build quality. Despite the looks of the HD800, they're all mostly made of plastic. The only metal present in these is in the grills protecting the area of the cup that lies around the driver of both of these open backs, and in the grill directly in front of the drivers. Now instead of a metal grill, the HD820 opt for a concave Gorilla Glass dome to reduce sound leakage. Remember, these are a closed back headphone. Speaking of being a closed back, although they share a very similar design language, the HD820's cups are a little bit deeper due to the pads in the lip that holds the glass dome in place. You can really feel the extra protrusion when holding it in your hands and when they're on your head. Now a quick little detail, the Sennheiser HD800 and HD800S actually have the logo embossed deep within the cups. Instead, the HD800 opt to have this logo right next to the driver, right outside of the headphone. This is the better choice in my opinion, it just looks a little classier, but of course you gotta make the more premium priced headphone look more premium. Now other than that, they feature the same type of connectors, the same microfiber headband on the underside, and the same type of plastic. Now, as far as comfort is concerned, all three of these feature massive cups that surround the listener's ear. Unless the headband does not extend to the size of your head, I highly doubt these cups will ever touch your ears. A quick tip: in order to find out exactly how far the headband should extend, look in the mirror as you adjust it and then place them on your head. The center of the drivers should align with your ears. It's important that you know that, since placement does affect the sound signature and quality that you perceive. Now, all three of these offer a very light amount of clamp force, which does cause them to slide back and forth on your head if you're looking to headbang or look up and down quite often. All three of these are relatively lightweight, but the HD820 do feel noticeably lighter, despite actually being the heavier of the bunch, especially on your head. It's funny, considering that Sennheiser claims that the HD820 weigh 360 grams without the cable. This might be a combination of two factors. One, the fact that it does use the most plastic materials, and two, the fact that the pads are the thickest of the bunch, which most likely helps secure the headphone onto your head. Now, the pads on the HD800 and HD800S are thin and made out of a microfiber cloth. Although they're very soft and comfortable, I feel that thicker pads would have helped the headphone secure itself onto your head more efficiently. That said, the HD820 feature thicker hybrid pads, which offer microfiber on the front and inner portion of the pads, and soft leather on the outer portion. Now, because of them, the HD820 do feel a tad more secure on my head. Now, there is a bit of a downside to these pads though. I use the HD800 and HD800S on the second highest setting that the headband has to offer. With the HD820, I have to completely max it out, and even then, they barely manage to fit me correctly. Now, a quick thing to point out here: since the HD820 are a closed back headphone, when you put them on without any sound playing, it sounds as if you put two giant clams right next to your ears. The pressure trapped within the cup gives it like a deprivation tank kind of feel to it. It's just one of the downsides of closed back coupled with the HD820's cavernous cups. Now, as far as amplification is concerned, these are rated for the same amount of impedance, which is 300 ohms, and I believe the same amount of sensitivity as well, which should be, I believe, 103 decibels. So through single-ended on the THX AAA 789, I run all three of these at 11:30 a.m. on gain 2. Through balanced, I run them at 9 a.m. on gain 2 and 11 a.m. on gain 1. So now let's go ahead and jump into the sound portion of this review. Before we begin, I'd like to point out that the following impressions are through single-ended only. My impressions about running these balanced, as well as any EQ adjustments, will be in the notes/observations portion of this review. Now, with that out of the way, let's begin. So with bass guitars, the HD800 and HD800S are basically two different shades of the same color. The HD800 is the most recessed of the bunch and offers a very controlled bass response that never becomes the priority. The HD800S then takes that bass response and turns it up a notch or two. This difference in elevation gives bass guitars a little more rumble and growl to them. The HD820 is a weird one. In terms of volume, it matches that of the HD800S while giving the deeper notes a little bit of extra growl and presence. However, the overall timbre of the bass guitar is sort of nasal, almost as if it caught a cold. This can also be heard in the bass note at the minute 34 mark in Zealots of Stockholm by Childish Gambino. With electronic bass, the HD820 actually has better presence in the sub bass. The HD800 and HD800S offer a more respectful slap, as opposed to the somewhat less respectful slap of the HD820s. Now, closer to the mid-bass, the HD800 is the thinnest, offering the flattest response. The HD800S offer a little extra mid-bass, which can be a little too much, just a little too much, in a few tracks. The HD820 offer the most mid-bass, and to be quite honest, it does sound really whack. The HD800S sound clearer and cleaner than the HD820 in this category. Now, a quick example: Zealots of Stockholm by Childish Gambino. At the 305 minute mark, the HD800 and 800S are very similar when it comes to that bass valley. They drop off and pick up right around the same area, though the HD800S do have the more elevated sub bass of the two. They have some pretty great extension, but it is linear and does lie near the more quiet side. The HD820 on the other hand possess a bit of a bass hump around the lowest portions of that valley, both from the decay and in the recovery. And yes, it does possess a bit more sub-bass presence than the HD800S. Now another example, Helena Beat by Foster the People. With drums, the HD800 and 800S are nearly identical. The difference between them is extremely negligible. The HD820 sounds more like you're hearing the drums from a stage above the main stage. Like, not that they sound farther away, they just sound as if a short difference in distance makes them lose their fullness ever so slightly. Now let's approach the mids. Hoo boy, here we go. Between the HD800 and HD800S, the differences are quite minimal. The HD820, however, has a really wonky midsection. They sound sort of sucked out in a way. So I'll give you an example. Dream On, the Postmodern Jukebox cover. When I put on the HD800 and HD800S, I thought to myself, okay, alright, pretty good. Then I put on the HD820 and I was a little surprised. The entire track had a timbre similar to that sound effect you might hear when a track or recording is being played out of a vintage radio or a phonograph in a video game or movie. That kind of like suck out, where the instruments sound kind of cold and lifeless, kind of, I don't want to say honky, but just kind of, yeah, a little honky. Unfortunately, this timbre extends to instruments like the cello. On the HD800 and HD800S, the biggest difference was distance to the listener. But on the HD820, it was just painfully clear. Another example, Tank by the Seatbelts. At the 31-second mark, the lower brass pops out a little more on the HD800S than on the HD800. They sound a tad more dynamic. On the HD820, that timbre makes them sound as if they were playing across a hallway. Now let's approach the treble response. The HD800S are slightly less sibilant than the HD800s, and the HD820 are slightly less sibilant than that. The HD800 and HD800S sound about equally as detailed in the air, but the HD800S are more forward here. Now the HD820 just don't get a whole lot of that air and do sound sort of encapsulated up there. With cymbals, the HD800S and HD820 both beat the HD800 when it comes to clarity. However, the HD800S do present them the most forward, while the HD820 and 800s are a bit more pulled back. As a whole, the entire treble response sounds a tad less forward on the HD800 than on the 800S, but on the 820s, the treble is reduced a bit further. However, its timbre sounds as if you were listening to like an open back headphone, and then you place your hands near the grills or on top of them. You know that feeling. That said, the treble still sounds clean, but definitely wacky. Now with Soundstage and Imaging, all three of these possess that ever-expansive soundstage that make these a staple for a whole lot of audio enthusiast collections. However, there is a slight difference. While all three of them are very close in terms of width, the two open backs sound entirely open. Music plays and sound just releases into the air. On the HD820, it's more like a massive cavern. There's a whole lot of room for sounds to exist in, but you can hear the edges where the sound travels to and then stop at. So this space limitation does affect the HD820's imaging capabilities as well. So an example, in Hotel California, if you listen to the 351 mark, you can definitely hear the drums traveling along the walls of the cavern, as opposed to simply moving from one point in space to the next. They still possess that HD8XO line DNA, but it's not exactly the same. If we're splitting hairs here, at the 37-second mark, the HD800S edge out the HD820 and 800 in terms of resolution by a small margin, and the HD820 edge out the HD800 by an even smaller margin than that. So for the notes and observations portion, before we jump into EQ settings, we're going to discuss running these single-ended versus balanced. Keep in mind though, I can't perform this comparison using Sennheiser's OEM balance cable, since I do not own one, and I'm sure as hell not paying $300 for a vacuum cleaner cable. Instead, I'll be using my custom aftermarket cable made by Sky Audio Cables on eBay. I'll try to provide a link in the description to their page if I can find it. Anyways, let's get down to it. So with the HD800S and the HD820, it made the sound a bit more intense and brought out some of the high end, for example, tambourines. But that really is nitpicking, and that can also be due to the balance portion versus single-ended of the THX AAA 789. Either way, I advised running them balanced if you can, just because it is a Summit-Fi headphone, so you may as well be squeezing out every bit of juice. You're most likely looking into getting a thinner and more flexible cable anyway, so you may as well get it balanced while you're at it. Now, the following settings are what I would apply to these if you intend on getting them. First and foremost, that bass shelf at 30 Hz is simply meant to improve bass extension. I also encountered a couple of dips in the mids and upper mids that I went ahead and lifted. And last of all, those infamous treble peaks. Now on the HD820, I tried reducing some of that bass bloat and lifting up some of the lower mids to see if I could mitigate that deprivation tank effect. Although I was mostly successful, you still have that bit of feeling where it's like everything's so far away because, you know, big soundstage, big cups and whatever, but it's still closed back. So to conclude, the HD820 is a beauty that you'll really want to meet. However, it simply doesn't live up to the reputation of its open back siblings. This is still one of the most impressive closed backs I've ever heard, but the price to performance ratio I know you can't even talk about price to performance in the Summit-Fi region, but seriously, like, you gotta feel like you're getting a decent return on something if you plan on buying it at all. I could even swallow the price and try to acknowledge its strengths, but the problem is, its weaknesses are far too problematic to ignore. So after a few minutes of using them, I constantly had to take them off and clear my throat just to relieve that weird sensation. It's a similar effect to wearing IEMs and earbuds. After a while, you mostly adjust to that wonkiness and its sound, but should you? Is it really worth all the trouble just to say you have a closed version of the HD800S? No, I don't think so. I would personally rather listen to my M40Xs. Not that they're better than the HD820s, but at least I don't have to constantly ignore obvious flaws with those. So, if you're looking for a high-end Summit-Fi closed-back headphone, I'd rather look into something like Fostex or the ZMF Verite Closed. They're right around that same price range depending on which you pick, and some of those Fostexes are actually much more affordable, like in the mid-Fi to hi-Fi area. Now, I've yet to hear any of them, but I do know that the community feels a lot more positive about those than these. So, yeah. Anyway, that's going to do it for me. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. You know what to do. Check out the links down below. Again, I don't recommend these, but if you want to check them out, the link is there for you to check them out. And yeah, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.